Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I sit down with folk musician John Dole. Enjoy. So your name is John Dole.
Yes.
That's your real name, full name.
Yep.
And Dole Music is your project, one of your projects.
We were criticized from the very beginning.
I can imagine. I was shocked by the name. I liked that you had a derogatory name for your project. How'd that come about? Was it just as obvious as it seems?
Well, it was counterintuitive to what was happening in the arts and music. I was told by many so-called experts that you can't do that. You can't have that name. So every time that was said, I thought, well, that's more of a reason to have it. Mm-hmm. It was kind of a in-your-face response to how things had to be done.
And was it just your music, Dole Music?
Well, it started out that way. It started out as a football coach. I also had a music side, right? And my career was going in football coaching, was going in a funny direction. And I thought that I had to make an artistic statement to counteract what was happening in my professional career. And so I was coaching at William Patterson College at the time. And I met a musician studio engineer there that ran a program, and he offered to record some of my songs, and then we had a concert. So it was used as a kind of a promotional tool for the football program, that a coach would be singing and into the arts.
Interesting.
And so the press really jumped on it, and Dole Music started to,
How old were you at that time?
That's hard to predict. I think in my 20s, in my mid-20s.
Oh, okay, so it's been a long time.
Oh, it's been a long time.
And how old are you now?
I am 74. How old are you?
35.
You're not supposed to ask that question to people of my age.
To men? I thought it was fair game with men. That was my understanding. So this is from the beginning. But also there's this sports, there's this athletics aspect of your life that I find interesting. So at that age, you were coaching football?
Yes. My plan was to, after college, as a player, I believed in some of the values that athletics supposedly projected at the time.
What would those be?
Endurance, hard work, goal setting, belief that you can do more than you think you can do. Mm-hmm. And so I really wanted to teach those values, having lived them as an athlete. I wanted to teach them as a coach. And I coached for many years, and then I found that the football that I believed was good was going in a totally opposite direction. And now I feel it's the fruition of that thought is happening now.
Can you explain that?
It's all money now.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question of it's all money, and inborn talent. The mental aspect of the game, I don't think is as in my day. If you were a player that was on the edge of being a great player and you were a good player, if you could mentally prepare yourself to cross the line into another echelon of playing. So
you're saying now it's hyper specialized. So you have so many people competing for it because of the money. But two, there was an opportunity for anyone in some sense to thrive at the time you were coaching it, if they could just muster the determination. Is that correct?
Yes,
yeah,
that's correct. You heard what I was trying. What I was trying to say. You probably verbalized it better than I did.
Well, it makes sense. It seems like it was more of a place to just turn boys into men, not a place to then build a career or make millions of dollars. So that's an interesting point I've never thought about, that it was maybe more democratic in that, or more accessible.
Well, there was more of a sense of do it for the Gipper.
Mm-hmm. Explain to the listeners, they don't know about the Gipper.
The Gipper, I believe, was a Notre Dame player, and
was it the coach? I'm not sure. Notre Dame is a good example.
The idea was that you were a team and you poured your soul into it for the team. Now it's become, to me, just the opposite. Like, it really bothers me when I see people dancing around in the end zone and everything. Look at me, look at me. I was a lineman. Nobody looked at linemen.
Right.
We knocked our heads off to try to help other players excel, and that was your job, and you took pride in it, and you did whatever you could to succeed at what you were doing, which meant trying to get to another level.
Well, yeah, I think it's very clear. Sports are often a great metaphor for me, if you watch the trajectory. But in the past, people were drafted to a certain team and they stay there their whole life often, even if management mistreated them in some ways, or their team had no promise. They never left. But today, especially in basketball, people are very much individuals. They will leave teams at the drop of a hat to seek a championship today. But I think that's true of many things in society, whether it's marriage or business. As much as I value the individual spirit and the society that cultivates it, there are some big issues there in terms of the collective welfare of a team or anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. I think we're on the same wavelength. I think it's probably our artistic spirits communicating here.
Well, but did you leave sports at that moment? Because I still play sports and I think they're incredibly valuable. My favorite moments in life, probably as obscene as it may sound, have occurred playing sports at this juncture in my life. So at that moment when you made this, is this in the 60s? What years are we thinking here?
Well, I graduated from college in 72.
72, okay.
And went right into a teaching coaching career up here in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And poured myself into that. Money meant nothing. It was the career, the trajectory of the career to help young men realize their full potential. So
Yeah.
I think if you go back to players that played under me, they would tell you I was a pretty brutal coach, because I knew from experience that if you force yourself to go one little step further than you think you can go,
Yeah.
that your mind learns how to expand itself and go into that direction. I used to write about this for the local newspaper.
Really?
As a
This
player.
idea?
Yeah, about
Pushing.
and teamwork and everything like that. Yeah.
How did you bring this brutality into art making? Is it present, or is it a place to escape that brutality?
I always thought that there was a connection. Nowadays, I think the arts and athletics are much closer than they were in the 60s. But to be a folk singer and a football player in the 60s was very strange. And the football program at Duke actually used it to try to help create a bridge between the intellectual community and the athletic community. So they let me have concerts in the football meeting hall and invite the campus. And that was actually the beginning of the thought that the two are one. It's mind. To me, football was mind. Okay, and
It's interesting. Most people wouldn't think that, so that's cool to hear. That you emphasize the mind there. At least when I went to art school, there wasn't even a sports program. I would organize sports, but it was very clear to me that artists had forsaken their bodies entirely, smoking cigarettes instead of eating breakfast, not sleeping on time. There seemed to be almost like an ascetic quality where it was, let's destroy the body because it represents, I still think there is a schism in some ways. It represents the jock, it represents the meathead, but it doesn't make sense. I mean, you can't perform if you don't take care of your body in the long term, it's very hard to perform as an artist or anything. So I always thought it was silly that was not an emphasis at my school. But I could understand back then too. Personas were less complex, if I can imagine. It seemed like you had to be a thing, one thing, pretty clearly. Now you can be 15 different things. You can be very confused. You can integrate those things. But as you were saying earlier about long hair, and I was saying, long hair could mean a lot of things now. It could mean very little, actually. Or someone dresses like a lumberjack now. Doesn't mean they're a lumberjack. But in your time, I imagine people were a little more simply projecting what they were, but you were caught in the middle of two things there.
Well, pre-60s, it was Father Knows Best, and Ozzie and Harriet, and Leave It to Beaver. Those are common. Those are common visions that are given about that era, and it was true. It was post-World War II, 50s, and Middle America was trying to make enough money to have a good job, to get a house, and to be in a nice neighborhood. That was your understanding of the direction of your life, and I think it was mostly the artistic community really broke from that, and then with the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement, it gave platforms for thought that broke that mold. And so people, for a while, you had to be on one side or the other.
Yeah.
But then there was a lot of cross, that people started to realize that, hey, these long-haired kids that are fighting against Vietnam may have something.
So when you made that transition, or let's use the metaphor of that program at Duke where you're kind of used as the bridge. Is that something that you remain to be, or did you just kind of go over to the art side, or did you constantly go back and forth between these two modalities?
I think by default I've had to go back and forth.
Yeah.
You know.
So what did that look like over time? Did you play sports? Did you continue to coach sports while writing the folk songs? Or how did that, we'll call it for simplistic sake, more traditional mode follow through in your life?
Well, you're asking all the questions that I ask myself. Mm-hmm. Actually, as a coach, I was still writing songs and I was playing guitar. And it almost
about anything in particular, content-wise?
Songs would just come to me. Mm-hmm. It's like, you know, you're an artist. Sometimes things just come to you, and you have to respond to it. We were taught as the thinking of the early days was that you didn't give in to these wild thoughts of, you know.
Sure.
Well,
sure. Yeah.
If you want to be a full person, you have to give in to these wild inspirations and thought. Otherwise, you're blocking out an entire part of your mind. And the duality of everything, and the yin and the yang, has always been one of the things that I believe the human race struggles with.
Well, because it isn't clear if it should be. I don't think some people are even interested in embodying that duality within themselves. They're happy to be simply one half of it and be antagonistic to another individual who represents the other half, or a nation who represents one half. So I think it's just a small percentage of people who are truly trying to integrate all of that into themselves, and or into a relationship, right? Like, it isn't clear to me if in marriage, it seems that I suspect each individual is changing and rotating in that yin and yang, right? But you make a decision there to participate in a bigger yin and yang than yourself, which I think is noble. I suppose it can keep enlarging out to society or coaching, and that would be the more noble end than retreating into yourself completely, although I respect monks, etc. But I don't think if I'm being honest, in the brief time I've had here, I don't think most people are even interested in this topic. It's just, you know, if they're happy to be a kind of simplified form in this life, in this world, you know. And no judgment there, really, if that's...
Well, we all yearn for structure.
We do.
Structure gives us stability and decreases anxiety, I guess. But structure also becomes stagnant. So when you have someone step outside of the structure, they're either murdered or killed, or they bring the structure to another level.
Both can happen, I think.
Yeah.
Both often happen together.
You know.
Because it logically, you know, this is an interesting part of art. It's like, can you really expect to be ahead of the curve, ahead of the masses, but commodify it at the same time? Because the market is predicated on, you know, I think the average person understanding something and buying it. So it's actually, I think there's many talented artists who've done both. I think they're exceptionally rare. But there's many artists who are, like you said, they're kind of beyond the system or way ahead of it, and they die broke, and that's the consequence of being ahead, you know? But is that something that you felt you were trying to do within the folk music? I know folk music has that element. I don't know a ton about folk music, but can you speak to your inspirations, or, you know, you've been making it for 50 plus years, right? You still make it, correct?
Yes, yeah. Dylan was one of the big, and for a lot of people my age, Dylan was the bridge between the structure and the chaos. And
why is that? Because he's like traditional in some sense. Folk
well, he
music is
was traditional.
Right.
He grew up on Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
But Woody Guthrie was not a traditionalist. Woody Guthrie was a rebel. He traveled all over the country and helped unions organize. But then when the government hired him to write songs about the Grand Coulee Dam or something like that, he cooperated with that. So he was a strange figure. And Pete Seeger gravitated towards Woody Guthrie, and they traveled together in boxcars, and so Seeger became a huge influence for me. But the earliest was Dylan, and Dylan was making a transition. Like when he was booed off the stage when he started playing rock and roll at, I think, the Newport Folk Festival. He came out electric, and they booed him off the stage. He was always seemed to be a step ahead of what was happening. So he was a huge influence early in my life, and then having later met Pete Seeger, he became like a real mentor to me.
How would you describe the difference between the two for someone who doesn't care or listen to either?
Well, Seeger died at age 94 or something several years ago, so he was much older. He was folk when folk wasn't even a topic, you know. I got in trouble with the Seegers once, and it was right over here at the Williams Center.
Yeah, sure.
They had always been very generous to our family in coming down and helping us with concerts, because they believed that some of the issues we were standing for were issues that they would stand for. So, but I was kind of a youngster, and I was all excited that Pete Seeger was going to come to Rutherford, and I was behind the stage, and Pete and Toshi were very close, and politically close, relationship close, everything, okay? And I was backstage with them, and I said something stupid like, "Isn't this folk music thing so great? This thing that was born in the 60s in Greenwich Village." Well, they went nuts. They really came down on me, and they said, "Don't you understand? As kids, they traveled all over the world. They spent their last dollars traveling all over the world, recording and filming folk music in all these remote places all over the world." So he was a real musicologist, and he was saying, "Don't you understand that this thing is everywhere, and that it was born, it's a human need that's born everywhere. There's folk music everywhere." And so I made some mental adjustments at the time and try to sing some foreign folk songs periodically.
How old were you at that time of that occurrence?
Gee, I'm bad at this. That would have to have been in the 90s.
Okay.
So I'm maybe in my late 30s, but to me that's being a youngster, you know. And I had experienced Greenwich Village. I'd go on there, and we used to, you know, the open stages in Greenwich Village.
And who's we in this context?
I guess, well, there were people. I had friends that were musicians.
And would that be under the Dole Music umbrella?
No.
Dole Music is just you?
I would think so. I mean, I think we had to change the name from Dole Music to When we produced other artists, we had to change it to JMH Dull Productions.
I saw that, yeah.
John, Martin, Helen, my son and my wife. Okay. John.
Do
Martin,
they both make music?
Yeah, JMH Dull Productions is a company that produces music and events. Okay. Dull music is just kind of more of an artistic expression of who I guess I am, more so than even my family.
And so, we spoke earlier, is your family a family of artists, like going back?
My wife's family were activists, not artists, but activists, okay? And they stood on the far side of a lot of common thinking going way back, okay? They were Irish Catholic activists, okay?
Interesting.
Out of Jersey City. And so Helen was brought up with that idea that you think and you don't accept the status quo, okay?
Yes.
My own family was born in the arts. My dad was a photographer by profession. He worked in what's now Christie's. He was an independent photographer that leased space and did the photography for Christie's and Park Burnett. So he was always exposed to the arts, photographing art collections and for catalogs of the wealthy.
Interesting.
And so we were brought up in that, and then my brothers got into athletics in our hometown, and so that kind of surfaced at that time, in high schools.
So if you had to describe Dull music, obviously it's folk, right? That's an important aspect of it.
I would think, unless my son continues the name, and he was just labeled as an emo artist by a reviewer. So.
Well, there's a lot of emo in New Jersey. It's a thing. But if you had to describe it for someone who hadn't listened to it, how would you do so? What is it about, over the 50 years of you making it? How would you condense it down?
Condense what?
Just describing what music you've made in your life. Is it guitar? What is your strength? What is?
It's based more in lyric than in melody.
So it's almost poetic.
Yes,
in that sense.
Exactly. It's poetry put to music.
And your instrument of choice is guitar?
It's the only instrument I play. I'd love to have played the piano, but do you play an instrument? I'm just kidding.
I played bass briefly.
Really?
I like staccato. Even in my drawings, I like very clear imagery, black and white, so I liked staccato bass playing, just very clear notes, very simple. But I think it was one of the earliest examples of me saying to myself, just because you like something doesn't mean you need to do it. I was already doing so many visual things, and I have the propensity to dabble, something I try to refine as I get older. So I played bass for 2-3 years, and I certainly relish the moments of bliss that can occur while playing music with others. It's a very strange feeling that you won't find in art. It's basically impossible. I don't know how you would find it in art. When people just start smiling or laughing when something is clicking. At least that was my experience. But I think ultimately, I just said to myself, this isn't the structure I'm interested in. I think music gives me more fuel spiritually throughout the day. But I think what I was given is a gift for visual art. So I think you have to kind of contend with that. You have to be real about, despite what we're saying about pushing through and entering the next level, I think there's also the reality of what you're given in life and how to maximize what you're given.
To me, and I may be wrong here,
Mm-hmm.
but you just sparked a thought that maybe art, the visual arts, is much more of an individual enterprise than music playing with other people. I mean, you don't do art with other people, right? I mean, you share art.
I started to do that later in my 20s and found it quite enjoyable, but I thought it was going to be antithetical to getting better at art initially. But for me, it actually showed me quite clearly what I was good and bad at. I do collaborate with my friends on books and etc. And that is certainly feels more musical. You're kind of compromising and contending with different personalities. But yeah, I would have to agree with you that I think in general art is a more singular activity. I think the rigidness of music, the scales, the mathematical structure already lend itself to some kind of collective, universal notion. And frankly, music is so much more important to our culture, I think, than visual art. Musical artists can be godlike. The highest, the most important fine artist is fairly irrelevant, I think, to the common person. It's just different. They don't, art doesn't really infiltrate the same way, I don't think. I mean, design does, commercials
Mm-hmm.
like we were talking about. And there's pros and cons to that, obviously. I think music can be incredibly dangerous. And for all the finger wagging of like Elvis's hips, etc.,
Right.
you can go back to that moment and say, oh, maybe there's something to be said about the Pandora's box that music can unleash culturally. I don't think we can be naive to the fact that ingesting lyrical content in a hypnotic way can influence your behavior. I'm certainly not advocating for any sensorial things, but I think it's just being mindful of and respecting the music you listen to, and understanding when you listen to this, it brings out a certain side of you, and it can be quite seductive. And I think that's what those people were concerned about, in the early 1900s or whatever. That was a ramble, but
No, we're on the same page here. I believe that music is a universal language. I think that art is too, but somehow the visual is less, I don't know, I'm searching for words here, less acceptable to the mind than music. Yeah. Music kind of hypnotizes you into, in other words, you can get lyrics over that would be offensive to some people if you have a good melody behind them.
Well, it goes away, It has a time structure, and those words were said and now they're gone. And in a drawing or painting, it's kind of frozen and present. So that may be true, that you can get away with a bit more there.
But you'll often find that musicians are artists also.
Yeah, and vice versa. I think it's about rhythm. I think, I don't know if you know about Rudolf Steiner and the Waldorf school and this kind of idea, but what he always emphasized is, even in homemaking, the daily rhythm, and that's your focus. It's like trying to find the correct rhythm of life. And I think that's the thread to me, is because there's ways you could. I've met people who abandon art making or music making because they wanted to live in a certain rhythm and to kind of integrate it in that sense. And I thought they did live rhythmically at a higher level. They seem to understand the lessons of art and music and integrate that into their life more tangibly, more externally as well. So I think that's the thing, is rhythm, is that like obviously visual art has rhythm, but it's not bound in the same way by the the way that music goes through time and ends and starts. Maybe because we're visual creatures, we take art for granted. We look at things all the time, but we don't hear beautiful things all the time. At least in modern society, you know.
There's a. I've found, and this is maybe one of my prejudices. I've found that there are some artistic schools that are elitist.
And you're saying that in a negative sense?
I don't know if it's negative. I think it's human. They.
Which schools do you say?
Well, you know, like progressive art. What do you call it? If I went to there's classical painting, and then there's
modern art,
modern art,
cubism.
Yeah, those things.
Do you feel those are elite?
Well, I think that there are people that would enjoy that type of art that think that they can enjoy, but Joe Schmo on the street couldn't because they couldn't understand that art, and that bothers me a little bit.
This is true.
You know, and
you don't feel that's present in music, or it's less.
Oh
present?
yeah, it's yeah, it is present. Like jazz for some is noise, and to others it's a higher art.
It can go either way for me.
You know,
that's for sure. No, that's fair. I mean, that's a common criticism of contemporary art, and it's valid. And it's something that I later valued about the Christian mode of art making was, as I step back and reassess Christianity, it really is a religion for the average person and how they live their life, and that every person has value. And the art shows that, I think. Anyone... if an alien showed up tomorrow with no cultural understanding, none of the history of why the art was made or the context, I think seeing a Caravaggio would be obviously something exceptional, but seeing abstract expressionism or a color field painting, they would walk right past it. Or a caveman or something, right? You drop a Caravaggio on a caveman, and they would never know how to get there. It would almost be impossible for them to get there. Mm-hmm. But there's plenty of contemporary art where I feel, and largely it's a problem of them. They start to over philosophize, and that created an elitism. I think that it started to become overly academic. But there's stuff that's supposedly visual art that is completely uninteresting visually. But then you read the philosophy behind it, and it could be interesting. But then it's just write an essay. I have no interest in that cross-pollination. I think things should be as they... I believe in a kind of rigid categorization that is broken at times, but nonetheless exists. So, and that's what... Folk is an interesting example, because obviously, by definition, it's again for folk, for the people. But it was also part of this revolution. So it was this traditional mode used to break something. Maybe that's how I see it.
That's at least part of the 60s in a nutshell.
And so you were young in the 60s. You were
in my 20s, right?
And what is your feeling about that? Growing up in that, is there any sense of nostalgia?
Yeah, well, basically, college was an unhappy time for me. Because first of all, there were probably 5 guys for every girl on the Duke campus.
Oh yeah.
So it was.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
You were almost like a monk during that time, and it wasn't a party school. It was like an intellectual school, but it was battling with itself because it was a Southern school. And during my time, they were recruiting the first blacks into Duke.
Mm-hmm.
And you had these southern fraternities, which were like rednecks, and you had black organizational groups, and you had independent groups, and they were all basically battling at that time.
Where did you find yourself?
I chose to be independent, but most football players were parts of some type of fraternity. And so I was labeled as, you know, the outsider in that regard. And that was painful. I was isolated in a sense.
I think this is, everyone I interview who's an artist, this theme of being the outsider, it sounds cliche, but it's just true. And someone has to be it. It is painful, but I think it's a thing that matures you over time in a different way. I think those earlier aspects of life, high school and college, can be quite painful for outsiders. But later in life, I find that this can be very beneficial to retaining autonomy, navigating many systems that I think are designed to shackle you. You know what I mean? But that skepticism, that fringe quality, I think is good. You know, I think it protects you a bit, and in a sense, you know that your decisions are your own. You know. So, do you still feel like an outsider?
I think I am an outsider.
But what does it mean? So, like, what does it mean for an outsider to be in a relationship or to have a child? Because those things require going inside, you know, to being related to.
Well, I thought what you said about growing up as an outsider prepares you for later in life. I believe that that's true, because I believe that you have to learn, it forces you to learn how to communicate on both ends of the spectrum.
True.
So when you become a communicator, which you are, having a podcast, okay, it's maybe it's because you see life in a different way and you see relationships in a different way. Relationships can be very stagnant things, like business relationships, you know, very utilitarian, that this person offers this to the table and therefore I will utilize that.
Yeah.
Whereas it's funny, and I don't know if I'm making too big a jump, but one of the big topics in business now, and I'm sure it's going to have a huge, it's going to grow exponentially, is the topic of emotional intelligence, EQ versus IQ. And there's a school of thought that EQ is more important in business than IQ. In other words, people that rise in business often have good people skills, are able to communicate well, and they have an emotional intelligence. In other words, they can read the real person that they're communicating with.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's completely contingent upon the business, right? There's many businesses that are mechanistic and cog-like. Efficiency models, actually. I don't know how much EQ is required for running a factory, you know, in an industrial sense. But, yeah, I think about that a lot. I mean, I think there's plenty of people who would suggest I don't have very high EQ. And I wouldn't argue with that, per se. I'm not sure what it means, I guess.
Why would you do a podcast if you didn't want to explore the emotions and intelligence, or get into a true communication with another person?
Well, yeah, no, that's absolutely. I guess the word emotion is quite complex to me. I'm definitely after the truth or the true essence of an individual. but I don't. That's not an emotion to me. That's an exploration. That's something way beyond emotion. I grapple with, especially as an artist, but as a person who's pragmatic, and I have to run a business, etc. I grapple with the utility of emotion. Actually, I think I see emotion through often a utilitarian frame. But that's been true for a long time for me. I don't.
Like, give me an example. I'm not sure I told you.
Sure. If I'm angry, right? My next thought becomes, what can I do with this anger? It's not like I'm interested in validating that emotion or dispelling it. I'm interested in, especially from an athletics perspective, right? Like, anger is interesting to me in athletics. I've seen people get angry and they get far better at the sport they're playing. I've seen people get angry and they become absolutely horrible at what they're doing. And so for me, like, I don't know if it's a sign of high EQ or low IQ to look at emotion through the frame of utility. Like, what can I do with anger? This is a complex topic. I think there's many metaphors that have been discussed over history about the chariot. I don't know. I don't have the exact metaphor, but it's always struck me that like the horses are emotion and the chariot rider is intellect, and usually those structures that are a little more complicated like that are the best way that I can understand the complexity of being human, as opposed to what often happens with media and studies is, okay, IQ's out, EQ's in, and there's kind of this endless selling of the new simplification, maybe?
See, this is an interesting topic to me because there's a part of me that would like to think that I'm a futurist.
A futurist?
I like to think of where all this is going from where it is now.
So where's it going?
And, well, I would say that machines, robotics, AI is going to take over IQ. I mean, a machine can be an accountant. Even the greatest accountants or the greatest chess players, a machine can take over that, okay? But I wonder whether machines will be able to take over EQ or that artistic, whether a machine will really ever be able to become they'll probably create machines that can be creative, but I think that there's this all goes down to spirituality.
I was going to say it's a metaphysical problem. It's funny. I view it from the lens of industrialization replaced men. In fact, there's a lot of penile-shaped things, pistons. It's just very like a male world,
Okay.
The world of industrialization. And obviously, men used to do a lot of the things that machines now do. And then they just became the managers of the machines. And in some ways, I think lost purpose entirely. For like a more traditional man, I think industrialization was a huge shock to their identity. I believe AI will be the feminine destroyer in the sense, the energy destroyer in the sense of they will build nurses who understand your psychology and respond compassionately, quote unquote, and creativity will be, I think threatened, like human creativity. And I think we will then be left with, from a utility perspective, where both men and women, masculine and feminine, will be asking themselves where they fit into a world of this nature. And that's disturbing to me. And I do believe that only a world with soul can recognize the lack thereof. And I'm not sure we will have the spiritual literacy or aesthetic literacy to understand the value of human interaction or creation. But I will be optimistic. I think we're going to have to ask ourselves what it means to be human, most important.
Okay.
And some will think it's wrong to be human. You know?
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
As an artist, you've had creative inspiration where you're lost in something comes to you and it kind of overtakes you and it becomes like a vision or
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Okay. So do you feel in your life that that is a spiritual experience?
Without a doubt. Yeah. And there's artists I know who would suggest no, that they're simply remixing memories and cultural ephemera. But I think that's an insufficient explanation to the manner in which you receive and complete ideas. It's a completely mysterious force. But the question then becomes, who's sending it down? And is it a neutral, benevolent, or evil force? I think all three are actually possible. But we don't ask that question much, you know? We say, oh, we got, like, the muse is a neutral idea, I think. Or it's God as love or something.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But obviously those who made it in a Christian mode, they thought it was coming from that Abrahamic God. And it reflects the values of that structure, the art they made. Now, I won't get into certain spirits, but I think it's fair to suggest that some music is made with more demonic inspiration, or there's this particular spirit, ironic inspiration. And I think there are battles at the spiritual level at play. So I used to view it kind of simply like, oh, I got ideas. Now time to execute the idea. Now I'm kind of like, I got an idea, but what is it in the service of? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where's this going? What's controlling? Essentially, something is controlling me. But sometimes I feel like you have to have the door open and something controls you and you don't know to what end till it's done, which is kind of frightening. But art is frightening. Real art is frightening, basically. It's horrifying.
Well, that's why you won't. There's a movement to get art out of schools.
Well, there's a movement to get art out of everything in a sense, because those in power are threatened by the new or the innovative in the arts or in anything, frankly. And the desire to control art in any form is something I'm opposed to. But I understand why people try to do it. You know, if a king is mocked or something, if this is, it is only a testament to the power of art. I think artists should always protect other artists' ability to express anything, but I think it only logical that the government will always seek to suppress it. And that's its role. Well, it's not interested in art, it's interested in power.
So it's going back to structure versus stepping outside of the structure with a little bit of chaos.
But I respect each unto itself.
Right.
You know? Like,
well,
why not?
Yeah.
Why would you, like, I'm not naive enough to think my government is interested in facilitating genuine art making. It's just, I don't believe in that, you know? And I also think it's an unholy matrimony. Those things should not meet. And I almost believe that about school as well. I think school is great for technical cultivation, but I saw it destroy many artists' souls. They go through school, they're in debt, and they have no interest in making art anymore because it's been systematized. Right. And once it used to be theirs.
Well, they can become graphic artists.
Well, hey, I find great joy in graphic design because it's communication, right? Okay. It's like it can be a very beautiful activity and very invigorating.
I'm not totally downing that, but I think that is, that there are graphic artists that now I'm becoming an elitist.
Go ahead.
There are graphic artists that are probably not artists in my definition of an artist.
Oh, no, certainly. Well, there's dark wizards, right? There's people who sell you things via seductive visual imagery. that it's a lie, right? So the distance between the product and the design, if it's great, it's a lie. It's just a lie. And then there's those who shine the proper light upon the product, and they say, this thing is great for you and your life, and they're not manipulating you via desire. So, of course, propaganda is similar. It can be done in a similar sense, but art is effectively about transcendence. So, and I think, you can find that in many places.
Well, then you get down to what is transcendence. And to me, there's your fusion between athletics and art, because
Transcending a limitation, or?
there are transcendent moments in athletics. And when you experience them, you know that they're transcendent. They're not, I think many athletes can experience things that people, they've pushed themselves to a point beyond what is considered the limit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a mental transcendent experience that a lot of people in humdrum life have yet to experience. For instance, you start interviewing players after they win the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel right now? They say, I can't put it into words.
Right.
And that's exactly what they're experiencing. They're experiencing something that is, you can't codify or put into a box. It's beyond that. And when I'm going to ask you, when your child comes into this world,
mm-hmm.
and you're present, I'm wondering what type of experience you're going to have.
Well, I'll let you know when that happens.
Yeah.
I'm assuming transcendent. I'll be a bit concerned if not. Well, because, yeah, I mean, it's in the most literal sense. How else could you transcend yourself if not making another human? It is the most literal path towards that. But it's also interesting in spiritual practices. I mean, if you really think about it, nobody is married or having children in any of these stories. Buddha or Christ.
Right.
It's like they are much more in the isolation mode. And, well, what is your experience of having you have one son?
Right.
And you play music together?
Yes. Yeah.
What is that experience like?
The music or the birth?
Just the whole journey, it's interesting.
Martin's birth was a transcendent.
Yeah.
For me, and I'm sure for my wife.
Yeah.
Because when the doctor held Martin up for the first time, like kind of raised him up, times, like transcendent experiences, time stops.
Yeah.
There's a moment that doesn't have time. It's contained in itself. Artists understand that, I think. Artists experience transcendent experiences. And so there was a transcendent experience of the birth. And so actually performing with him and sometimes opening for him
mm-hmm.
is very much a continuation of that spiritual journey. I would not often talk about this. You're a good podcaster.
Well, I mean, I think that's the beauty of having a child is also, I don't know. I remember I went to Disneyland way too late in my life. I was like 25. I'd never been there. But for some reason during that trip, I was shocked by the rhythm and pattern of a older person with a little thing that looked like them at a different scale, right? And then I recognized in some sense that rhythm is so natural and essential that it's very odd in modernity that we were able to break it, or at least delude ourselves into breaking it. Like, you can live a really, or you can try to live a very monotonous life these days, in a sense, right? Like a kind of flat life. Maybe you work the same, you're in a career mode. This is what you do. You seek pleasure and comfort, and then you die. I think this is a trick, a deception. But I think it is in the service of comfort in a lot of ways. There's this kind of idea about having a child or children that it's going to be hell, but that's a misunderstanding. Well, I'll let you know when it occurs to me. But I think the thread is this: like, those are the moments you grow in athletics or in life or in music and art. It's very obvious that when you're pushed to your limits, you break through something in a way not previously imagined or imaginable. And obviously human civilizations do this as well. And so for as much as I might lament AI in some ways, I have to also ask myself, there seems to be some mysterious trajectory that no one human planned or knows about civilization. It's all rather surreal. It's not clear. We didn't get together and say, this is how the last 1,000 years will look, and we're going to end up at AI. But clearly something pulled us to it, to either end us and send us back to a more humble period, or to send us off, probably, into something else. So I think I have to always trust that. But as bizarre as it sounds, I've had moments in Frisbee, Ultimate Frisbee, where I essentially blacked out and did something unimaginable to myself, something beautiful, and then people would tell me it, and I have no recollection of doing it. And it's so insane to talk about. I think especially for more arts-focused people, that this could happen in like a recreational league, in New Jersey on turf with cement underneath it. But I just can't emphasize enough the beauty of the shame, the kind of celebration of sports. It's just a very beautiful microcosm of what you have to deal with in society, and I think it helps you grow. Just like music, I think, are you or do you mostly make in a singer-songwriter mode, or do you work with others in like a band group kind of?
Mostly singer-songwriter, but it's kind of evolved into some band type experiences, and which I'm not opposed to. It's just if you have a full-time job, maintaining a band, if everybody's got a full-time job, becomes, so if you want to express your art, you kind of better think you better get it done by yourself with the cooperation of other people, if they so desire to cooperate. But to create a band, at my age, that would be ludicrous. But even at Marty's age, he's 38, right? To create a band when most people are trying to put bread on the table as well as nourish their art, would be difficult or not really necessary to,
Well,
but
you could do it.
I guess you could.
Did you find that your creative output over the 50 or so years was consistent, or was there a kind of undulating productivity and quality? I'm curious about I'm always curious about people who have a very high vantage point over their creative output. Did you notice that quality went, in waves or up only?
What do you call it when you're in a dead point in your creative mind?
A writer's block?
Oh, right. Yeah. There are certainly, at least for me, and I can't talk to everyone, I do know artists that will work themselves through a writer's block
Yeah, very
by
admirable.
forcing themselves. To me, that was never me, and I don't know if that's because I'm lazy or it's because I'm waiting for the muse,
You never know.
you know.
It could be both. I feel the same way.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I'm more skeptical or suspicious of myself typically. So, I usually accuse myself of laziness if I'm on that, in that moment, and I think fortunately as well and probably with music, but with art, there are many activities that require no inspiration. They're just very. You got to color a big space black. So if you got a writer's block, you do that. Or I'm assuming if you got to edit a track, like there's these moments that you can find a lower version of yourself can execute. I also believe, you should just make bad stuff, maybe not show it, and just push and push. But they're very different ways of thinking. Waiting for the muse versus like almost an athletic mindset of just go. Go until you shoot a basketball until it goes in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think athletes have the, but you see it. Sometimes they're visited by something special, athletes, I think. Some higher power.
Well, I think some pro teams are actually hiring psychologists to help people reach that.
Yeah.
And, an interesting story for me, and I have great respect for her, was Simone Biles, the gymnast.
Yeah.
How she took, 2 years off because her head wasn't in sync with her body.
Right.
And she was criticized for that. And I'm saying, no, she's correct.
Yeah.
She's doing, that's why she is the greatest, because she was able to realize that.
Yeah, it's an interesting realization. But that's rhythm. It's in a sense, it's the rhythm of things being out of sync and dissonant. But it's kind of an interesting thing. I think in your daily life, it's always important to have a kind of clear rhythm, which you spoke to me on the phone about. It seems like you have a very clear day, often. At this time, you do this.
If you don't have some organization, especially when you're a disorganized person.
Are you disorganized?
I would say I have to force myself to organize. I'm a list maker. I make lists all the time to try to figure out which thing is better to do before this, so I save time while doing this.
Of course.
And, I think my mind needs that structure. Otherwise, I'd be, my favorite time is early in the morning having a cup of coffee and just letting my mind go wherever it wants to go. Mm-hmm. And I find that gives me strength for the day. It really does, So.
If people want to listen to your music, where can they do that?
Well, I'm finding that there are several YouTube expressions. If there was a television show called Horses Sing None of It, it's hosted by a folk musician, country musician in western New Jersey, and he hosted a friend of myself.
Recently?
No, this was quite a long time ago. Most of my internet stuff is ancient. And there are tapes of a fellow named Ted Clancy and myself. We did a whole TV series, a filler series for a cable company way back in the 80s, I think, or the 90s. And they're actually very professional and well done.
Hey, when you look back, is there a particular song or moment or concert that you can identify as the clear peak? Even if it's not recorded. Is there like, I'm curious when I'm your age, am I going to be able to look back and say, all right, that book right there or that album, in your instance. That's it, and my life was in service of, creatively speaking, in that.
Well, I had a very private moment once with Pete Seeger that, to me, was transcendent. And Pete performed his last concert ever in New Jersey with our production company. So that was, and it was a sellout crowd, and it was, there were a lot of transcendent meaning that the audience, without invitation, just stood and clasped arms and swayed to the songs, like We Shall Overcome and things like that. Very transcendent. And then I had a personal experience. Marty and I and a great banjo player by the name of Tony Trishka had a private meeting with Pete a few days before he passed away. And he sang a song for us, and that was really transcendent, because the song was actually almost the self-eulogy, where when these fingers can strum no longer, hand the old banjo to someone stronger, to young ones stronger. He was like passing the tradition, the folk tradition, down. That was an incredible experience that I don't often share because I can't do it justice.
No, that's a good answer.
So, but and I have 4 albums. Our website is now functioning. During COVID, it just kind of shut down, but it's dolemusic.com, and there are little tits and tats, and it's getting more active every day. So I think you'll find a lot of video on there. Within the next 3 weeks, there'll be a lot of video. And we'll probably open a YouTube channel in the near future.
And you have a concert coming up?
Well, that's another part of your being that we'll have to sit down and discuss, because you are the manager of the Carlos Williams Center for the Arts, and we'd love to. Your staff did a beautiful job with our last 2 concerts, and so we're very enamored that the Williams Center is on the move again.
Nice.
It's exciting, and congratulations, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
And
we should, if we get a date, I think we have one on the calendar that we have to discuss.
We've discussed some, but I think we're looking towards May now.
Well, we'll put this out before, so people know.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Sure.
And now, after this discussion, I love that logo.
Oh, okay.
And now I completely understand that logo. I'll use it as the image for this. Was that made during that time? That time at Duke?
That was made afterwards.
Can you explain
we had an
that?
office on Glen Road. And the Williams Center was lacking any programming, so they invited us to start bringing some programming into the Williams Center. This was years ago. Like I said, I'm bad with years. I think it had to be in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so we started bringing shows to the Williams Center.
And who made this image? It's very alluring.
I met a woman who was a visual artist, and she worked for us on Glen Road for a long time, and we were trying to come up with a logo, and like you said, you kind of understand.
Yeah, everything is there. That's why I liked it. But even when I saw
had
it,
that vision.
This is strange. This is a strange image.
Yeah.
I said, this is notably strange. Some music and a football helmet, and this kind of fusion.
Yeah.
I could tell it represented something deep, a complexity. you know?
Well, it came from her inner being. After working and trying to understand what the mission was of the business and where we were going and everything, she came up with this idea, and I looked at it, and my jaw dropped. It was a visual representation of, you know. So it was. Well, thanks for picking up on that.
Oh yeah, I don't know why, but that image, very clear. So I'll put that as the image of this podcast so people understand.
Okay.
But good talking to you.
Good talking with you, Michael. Always.
Music by Dory Bavarsky and Mingja Chen. Next up, we have John Chow. Enjoy your week.
John Chow.